Hollywood sold the myth of powerful men who conquered studios and audiences without help. But behind the velvet curtains were quieter arrangements. Alliances where wealthy women funded ambition, stabilized collapse, opened doors that talent alone could not unlock. Tonight, we peel back the polished legend and rank 10 Golden Age actors by how deeply they relied on female fortunes. The truth is more complicated than the movies ever admitted. John Barrymore. If there was ever a Golden Age legend who drifted from brilliance into dependence, it was John Barrymore. By the late 1930s, the man once called the Great Profile was no longer the commanding prince of the stage. Alcohol had chewed through his discipline. Studios had begun to treat him as a liability. And the money that once flowed like champagne now disappeared just as quickly. In those final years, Barrymore was not sustained by box office power. He was sustained by wealthy companions. Socialites and affluent admirers stepped into the vacuum left by fading contracts. They financed apartments. They covered debts. They maintained a lifestyle that his declining career could no longer justify. This was not rumor whispered in a smoky corner. Biographers documented how he leaned on women with independent means, while his earning power shrank. Barrymore had always attracted powerful women. Actresses, heiresses, patrons of the arts. But early in his life, those relationships were mutual exchanges of status and glamour. Later, they became lifelines. His charm remained sharp. His wit still dazzled dinner tables. Yet the structure beneath him was cracking. Creditors circled. Roles grew smaller. Drinking deepened. There were periods when wealthy partners stabilized him financially. They paid household expenses. They absorbed his debts. They allowed him to project the illusion that the king still sat on the throne. In truth, the throne was mortgaged. What makes Barrymore rank highest in financial reliance is not a single marriage. It is the pattern, repeated dependence, repeated rescue. He was no longer the dominant financial force in his relationships. The women around him often had stronger economic footing than he did. And here is the tragic twist. He was once the one who commanded stages in New York and Hollywood alike. He once negotiated from power. To watch that arc bend toward reliance is to watch the Golden Age strip away its own illusion. But Barrymore was not the only man who found himself shaped and supported by a woman with deeper pockets. Our next name is far more surprising. Because this man built himself into a symbol of rugged independence. Yet at the very beginning of his rise, he did not stand alone. Clark Gable. Before Clark Gable became the king of Hollywood, he was a struggling actor with ambition larger than his bank account. The image history remembers is broad-shouldered confidence. The reality of the early 1920s was far less glamorous. Enter Josephine Dillon. She was older. She was financially secure. She believed in him when casting directors did not. Dillon paid for dental work that transformed his smile. She funded voice training. She invested in grooming and coaching that refined his rough edges. In many ways, she engineered the version of Clark Gable that studios later signed. Their marriage was not a fairy tale romance. It was strategic and deeply practical. Dillon had money and connections. Gable had potential. During those early years, he relied heavily on her resources. Without her financial backing, he may never have crossed the threshold from regional theater to serious film opportunity. Later came Rhea Langham, a wealthy Texas socialite. Again, Gable aligned himself with a woman whose independent fortune provided stability. At this stage, he was earning more, yet the pattern is clear. He gravitated toward women with economic strength. They offered insulation while he climbed. Unlike Barrymore, this reliance did not define Gable's later career. Once Gone with the Wind exploded into cultural dominance, he commanded enormous salaries. He became the provider. The myth solidified. Yet the foundation of that myth rests partly on women who financed his transformation. The dental procedures, the lessons, The early social positioning. These were not minor details. They were structural supports. Gable ranks just below Barrymore because his dependence was concentrated in his formative years rather than his decline. It was temporary, yet critical. Without Dylan's financial intervention, the king might never have worn the crown. And as we move forward, the stories become more complex. Some men were shaped by wealthy wives. Others were sustained by patrons during fragile transitions. The surface glamour hides arrangements that were quieter yet powerful. Rudolph Valentino Long. Before the word celebrity was common currency, there was Rudolph Valentino. He did not simply act. He ignited hysteria. Women fainted in theaters. Fan letters arrived in piles. Yet behind that global obsession stood a relationship that quietly shifted the balance of power in his life. When Valentino married Natasha Rambova, the dynamic was not a simple romance between two artists. Rambova came from wealth and possessed independent financial resources. She was educated. She was socially connected. She understood art direction and costume design at a time when few women were granted such authority in film production. And she did not merely accompany Valentino. She influenced him. Rambova's money insulated them from certain studio pressures. During conflicts with Paramount, she supported his decision to walk away from contracts that restricted his autonomy. That move was bold. It was risky. And it was only possible because he was not solely dependent on studio paychecks at that moment. In practical terms, she financed aspects of their lifestyle when he was in professional limbo. During disputes that halted his film work, Rambova's independent means allowed them to maintain status. She paid for travel. She managed properties. She funded creative projects that studios refused to back. Yet the power dynamic was complicated. Industry gossip painted her as controlling. Executives disliked her involvement. Some blamed her for career missteps. Whether fair or not, the perception was clear. Valentino was not operating alone. He was operating within a partnership where her wealth and influence carried weight. He ranks here not because he lacked earning power. At his peak, he commanded significant salaries. He ranks here because, during crucial turning points, his financial security was reinforced by a woman whose resources expanded his options. Valentino was adored by millions. But even icons sometimes lean on private foundations the public never sees. And the next story shifts tone entirely. Because this man cultivated an image of toughness that bordered on dangerous. Yet his early survival in Hollywood depended on alliances forged in very different social circles. George Raft. George Raft did not arrive in Hollywood polished and refined. He came from Brooklyn, from dance halls and nightclubs, from associations that hovered near the edges of legality. His persona was sharp suits and controlled menace. But before the studios turned him into a reliable supporting tough guy, he navigated a world where wealthy women provided stability. In New York during the 1920s, Raft worked as a dancer in elite venues. These were not modest ballrooms. They were playgrounds for affluent society women who sought excitement beyond their predictable circles. Raft was charismatic, athletic, attentive, and he formed relationships that extended beyond the dance floor. Several accounts from biographers describe older, wealthy women who financed aspects of his lifestyle during these formative years. They provided apartments. They introduced him to influential figures. They paid generously for companionship. While the term kept man is dramatic, the underlying reality was a transactional arrangement shaped by class and desire. When he transitioned to Hollywood, he carried with him connections cultivated in those circles. Early on, he did not command major salaries. He relied on savings and assistance accumulated through these relationships. That financial cushioning allowed him to survive long enough to secure film roles. Unlike Barrymore, who declined into dependence, or Gable, who rose from temporary reliance, Raft's situation was rooted in pre-stardom survival. Without the backing of affluent patrons, he might have returned to obscurity before Hollywood took notice. What sets Raft apart is the environment. He operated in social spaces where companionship and financial exchange were openly understood. The arrangements were less hidden than later Hollywood myths would suggest. By the time he achieved film recognition, his independence strengthened. Yet the path that led there was paved partly by women whose wealth exceeded his own. And as we continue, the list grows more intricate, each to fracture the closer we look. Montgomery Clift. Montgomery Clift never fit comfortably inside the machinery of Hollywood. He arrived already refined, already selective, already resistant to the publicity games that studios demanded. Yet beneath that artistic control, there were periods when his personal and financial stability depended heavily on wealthy women who believed in him. Clift earned strong salaries in the late 1940s. Films like A Place in the Sun elevated him into the upper tier of actors. But fame did not bring emotional security. He struggled privately. After the devastating car accident in 1956, his physical pain and addiction began to erode his reliability. Production delays and insurance complications made studios cautious. During these vulnerable stretches, Clift was surrounded by affluent female friends and patrons. Women from powerful social circles offered financial assistance and practical support. They paid medical expenses. They provided housing when his own stability wavered. They shielded him from creditors during periods when film offers slowed. Unlike Raft, whose early reliance was transactional, Clift's situation was rooted in emotional bonds. Wealthy women admired his sensitivity and intellect. He attracted women who were independently wealthy and culturally influential. In moments when his career momentum faltered, they stepped forward. He never publicly presented himself as dependent. His reputation remained that of a disciplined method actor. Yet behind the curtain, there were documented instances where others absorbed financial strain he could not manage alone. Clift ranks here because his reliance was intermittent yet significant during crisis. He was not a man who built his entire career on a wealthy partner. He was a man whose fragility created windows where outside financial support kept him afloat. The myth of the self-sustaining male star softens when examined closely. Clift was brilliant. He was gifted. He was also human and at times financially vulnerable. And our next actor represents a different form of dependence. Not during decline, not during injury, but inside a marriage where his wife's earning power eclipsed his own at the height of her fame. Franchot Tone. Franchot Tone entered Hollywood with aristocratic poise. Educated, cultured, confident. He seemed to carry the air of a man who would always command his own space. Yet when he married Joan Crawford, the balance of fame and money shifted dramatically. At the time of their marriage, Crawford was one of the most bankable actresses in Hollywood. She commanded top billing and top salary. Tone was respected, but not at her commercial level. In financial terms, she was the powerhouse. Industry gossip at the time was merciless. Columnists suggested Tone benefited from her connections, that he moved through higher professional circles because of her star wattage. Whether exaggerated or not, the economic disparity was clear. Crawford earned more. Crawford controlled larger contracts. Crawford maintained the more dominant career. Tone did not vanish into obscurity. He continued working steadily. Yet his social standing rose significantly through association. Invitations, visibility, influence, all expanded within the orbit of a woman whose financial and professional power surpassed his. Unlike Gable, whose reliance existed before he became dominant, Tone's marriage occurred while both were established. Yet the imbalance was visible. In a studio system obsessed with male authority, it was Crawford who held greater financial leverage. Their relationship was volatile, public, competitive. And when it ended, the narrative of him as the less powerful partner lingered. Tone ranks here because his reliance was not survival-based. It was positional. His wife's wealth and fame amplified his reach. His financial footing during their marriage was strengthened by a woman who out-earned him. The Golden Age sold audiences stories of heroic leading men. Off-screen, the reality was sometimes reversed. Women, at the peak of earning power, could become the economic anchors. In the next part, we move toward actors whose reliance was subtler, yet deeply strategic during early ascent. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper built his image on silence, on restraint, on a kind of masculine steadiness that felt carved from the American West itself. Audiences saw a man who needed no one. Yet before the Academy Awards and towering salaries, there was a different chapter, a quieter one shaped by older and wealthier women who recognized potential before studios did. In the 1920s, Cooper was not yet the commanding presence of High Noon. He was a young actor navigating Hollywood without significant financial backing. During this period, he formed relationships with affluent women who moved comfortably through elite social circles. These were not casual flirtations. These were alliances that opened doors. One early relationship with an established older woman provided him not only financial security, but social legitimacy. She introduced him to producers. She hosted gatherings where he could be seen. She shielded him from the harsh instability that crushed many aspiring actors. There are accounts that she covered expenses during stretches when film roles were inconsistent. What makes Cooper's situation compelling is the contrast between image and origin. The man who would later portray stoic independence once relied on the economic and social capital of women who possessed more stability than he did. Not by the time his career solidified, he no longer needed that support. His salary escalated rapidly. His persona hardened into myth. But those early years mattered. They formed the bridge between obscurity and opportunity. Cooper ranks here because his reliance was strategic and temporary, yet undeniably beneficial. He did not collapse into dependence. He leveraged connections and financial insulation during his climb. And the illusion of rugged isolation becomes slightly less convincing when we recognize how carefully that ascent was scaffolded. Now we move toward a figure whose life was less about rugged mythology and more about charm. A man whose entire existence revolved around glamour and elite companionship. Tyrone Power. Tyrone Power possessed a face that seemed engineered for Technicolor romance. He was elegance refined, a matinee idol whose presence could soften a frame instantly. Yet behind that polished exterior were relationships that tied him closely to wealth beyond his own. Power was successful early. Studios positioned him as a leading man almost immediately, but he gravitated repeatedly toward women of significant means. His marriages and romantic entanglements often involved partners with independent wealth and social influence. One early relationship connected him to affluent European circles, travel, residences, lifestyle. These were not always sustained purely by studio income. There were periods where the financial structures around him included contributions from women whose resources exceeded his. Unlike Barrymore, who relied during decline, or Raft, who relied during survival, Power's situation was more lifestyle-oriented. Wealthy partners allowed him to inhabit a level of luxury that exceeded his studio contracts alone. Homes abroad, extended stays overseas, social integration into upper-tier society. This was not desperation. It was alignment. He selected partners whose fortunes complemented his fame. In doing so, he ensured that even during slower production years, his standard of living did not contract dramatically. Power ranks lower in reliance, because he was commercially viable for much of his career. Yet, the pattern of aligning with independently wealthy women suggests a strategic comfort in relationships where financial imbalance favored his partner. The Golden Age loved the illusion that leading men controlled every aspect of their destiny. In reality, many navigated systems of patronage and partnership far more intricate than publicity photographs suggested. And now, as we approach the final names on this list, the dynamics shift again. The remaining entries reveal dependence rooted in ambition and reinvention rather than survival or luxury. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn sold danger with a grin. Sword in hand, hair perfectly disordered. He looked like a man who conquered both oceans and drawing rooms with equal ease. But before Captain Blood and the adventures of Robin Hood turned him into a global sensation, his life operated on far shakier financial ground. When Flynn first arrived in Hollywood, he was not the polished swashbuckler audiences remember. He was a drifting actor with limited credits and a talent for inserting himself into elite company. During those early years, he formed relationships with wealthy women who were drawn to his recklessness and charm. Several biographical accounts describe how affluent older companions supported him during his transition into the American film industry. They funded housing. They introduced him to producers. They financed periods when auditions failed and contracts stalled. Flynn understood social leverage instinctively. He moved through high society parties with the confidence of someone who belonged even when his bank balance said otherwise. Unlike Gable, whose transformation was shaped by structured training, Flynn's support system was more fluid. It revolved around social access and financial cushioning rather than direct career management. Yet the effect was powerful. He survived long enough to secure a Warner Brothers contract that changed everything. Even after achieving stardom, Flynn's financial habits remained reckless. Lawsuits, divorces, tax issues. There were moments when wealthy companions again stabilized him temporarily. His lifestyle consistently outpaced his income. Charm often compensated for shortfalls. Flynn ranks here because his reliance was cyclical. Early ascent and later instability both intersected with women who possessed stronger financial grounding. He was not permanently dependent, but he repeatedly leaned on relationships that softened economic turbulence. The irony is striking. The screen persona radiated invincibility. The private reality contained vulnerability sustained by patrons who rarely received public credit. And now, we turn to the final name, a figure who is often remembered for eccentric genius and staggering ambition. Yet even he experienced moments where powerful women provided crucial support. Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes is rarely categorized alongside actors. He was an aviator, a producer, a magnate. Yet in the early phase of his Hollywood life, he operated within circles where wealthy women influenced his trajectory in surprising ways. Though Hughes inherited significant wealth from his family, he often engaged in high-risk ventures that strained liquidity. Aviation experiments consumed capital rapidly. Film productions ballooned beyond budgets. There were periods when external financial reinforcement became necessary. During his early Hollywood years, Hughes cultivated relationships with affluent women from established social families. And these women were not passive companions. They offered access to elite financial networks. In some cases, they invested in or socially legitimized projects that banks viewed cautiously. Unlike the others on this list, Hughes was not traditionally kept. He possessed immense resources. Yet, the strategic partnerships with wealthy women provided financial and social buffers during volatile experiments. His interactions with heiresses and socially powerful women helped secure introductions to financiers and political figures. When production overruns threatened his films, relationships often opened alternative funding conversations. The dynamic was subtle but significant. Hughes ranks lowest in direct financial reliance because he was rarely dependent in a survival sense. However, the role of wealthy female allies in stabilizing ambitious undertakings cannot be ignored. Influence often moves through informal channels. The Golden Age narrative prefers clean archetypes: dominant men, dependent women. The deeper history tells a more layered story. Financial support flowed in multiple directions. Power shifted quietly within marriages and private arrangements. Now that we have reached the end, the ground is level. The glamour has thinned. And what remains is a portrait of ambition sustained not only by talent, but by relationships where wealth and influence reshaped the expected order. History remembers the spotlight. It rarely remembers who paid the electricity bill. These stories do not diminish talent. They reveal the hidden architecture beneath fame. If this changed how you see old Hollywood, let me know. Not and Stay with us for the next untold chapter behind the silver screen.